big thank you for your again and again and again. Those of you who doesn't know, this is Yael and Ayal. They both own this house. They hosted us tonight and this evening, and this heart is so big that really on Sunday evening he said, "Oh, I can host it," and then by Sunday 10 p.m. it was, and like Sunday 10 p.m. 01, she said yes. And that's how it works, and this is how we are community for the community kind of thing. Like, yes, definitely we would love to have another house hosting next time so that Yael will not have to do it. This is something that I think we should say. Thank you again for everything you did for us. Just another small, short introduction. This event today is part of education and events that we're doing for the community to learn. The important thing is for us to understand, even though it's summertime and we want to rest, we cannot sleep. No sleeping for the Jewish community. This age is done. We have no privilege to do that anymore. So as much as you can to attend, to come, to help, an hour, 2 hours a week, whatever. There's many volunteers here that helps us a lot. But I want to say, really, we don't have the privilege anymore to be silent or to be sleeping. So, any ideas, anything that you want us to do, summertime is time that we prepare and plan. We're going to have committees, we're going to do things that we want you guys to help us. So reach out after or tomorrow, today, and let's get to work. I want to say another thing. I met Olga in IAC Summit in DC. I didn't meet her. I saw her in a panel, the same panel, there was only one missing, and I was amazed by this panel. I thought it was a very, very interesting panel, and I said to Galina, my friend, Galina, go get her. So that's how it worked, right? That's how it worked. I don't know if you remember, but that's what I remember. Anyway, Olga Deutsch, I want to introduce Olga Deutsch. She is the Vice President of NGO, extremely knowledge of wealth and finance. She's here to share her insight with our own Yossi Hollander, IAC National Board, a big philanthrope and activist that none of us can even share. Thank you for being here.
Welcome everybody. Olga she's a vice president of an organization called NGO Monitor. It's an organization that started 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, to monitor the funding activities of the bad guys, shall we call them, across the world, Europe and here, but not only, using largely a network of financing, largely through NGO, non-government organization. Of course, it expanded ever since, and the research has expanded. Olga has appeared in more parliaments than any other parliamentarian that I know in the world. I think she's probably, 20, 30 parliaments already that you spoke to about the subject, so this is her expertise, and she can describe a lot to you, and I'll let her start. I'll drop a bite or two here and there. So please, Olga.
Good evening, Erev Tov. First of all, I mean, an amazing round of gratitude and thank you and toda rabah to all the hosts. Thank you for opening your so awesome house to us. I was not prepared for the view. So, I understand the call to host events in other houses, but I would gladly come back to this. Thank you to IAC, an amazing multiplying force and house to a community of Israelis in North America that I don't think had a home and a voice until IAC stepped up. And I think it has also given us, organizations based in Israel, a platform that we haven't had before, and a sense of relevance, right? That Israel matters, and everything that happens around and about Israel ultimately affects the Jewish community around the world. And last but definitely not least, a major thank you to Yossi, who is a force of nature, a leader, a visionary, a supporter of NGO Monitor, and someone that I hope that I can call a mentor on many issues. And it is a particular honor to be in these conversations with you. And thank you all for joining. tonight to what is probably going to be, as someone said here, a rather depressing conversation, right? I'll tell you a few words about myself so you understand my background and why some of my expertise lies exactly where it is. I was not born in Israel, but unlike the name would have you think, not in Russia. I'm originally from Serbia, former Yugoslavia. Not an underrepresented Jewish community in Europe, but I'm very European, hence my expertise also in Europe and understanding parliaments and cultures and mentalities, and but also understanding why Europe matters. Let me put it in a context for you before I start, and you will understand when I start talking about NGO Monitor why it matters. Europe is the largest trade partner of Israel today, period. Unlike what people think that it is the US, and US is politically Israel's most important ally, militarily and so on, but trade-wise, culture-wise, exchange-wise, it is definitely Europe. Now, put that aside, and I'll start talking more about NGO Monitor. Before I moved to Israel, I also, my background is in business, so I also have a personal affinity to finances, banking, insurance, and I tend to understand numbers, and I tend to understand their importance, and I tend to understand the power behind the money, sometimes more than the words themselves. I lived in and worked in Germany, so I'm also fluent in German, and then in Brussels, so I understand European Parliament and what happens there. And then the road has led me to Israel, where I first worked for 8 years in business, in high tech and low tech, but I sensed that the set of skills that I bring to the table were not best put to use in business, because there were many, sometimes too many, very smart and much pushier than me Israelis who did a better job in sales. But that there was also an underrepresentation in pro-Israel advocacy and how Israel is being defended around the world. And that's how 10 years ago I ended up working at NGO Monitor. I first built our Europe operations, and which is about 85% of what we do. And 3 years later, I was made a vice president. So what is it that NGO Monitor does? We are an Israel-based research organization, but we don't do research just for the sake of research. We called it an applied research institute because we take our reports and then we try to have impact, to make a difference with them. Before October the 7th, it would have taken me 5 minutes to explain what it is that we do. But after October the 7th, I like to say the following line. We defend Israel's right to exist within the human rights space. And after October the 7th, I think everyone in this room understands exactly what that means and how Israel is systematically and through Israel, also the global Jewish community, being vilified and attacked, all in the name of human rights and everything that is just, right? Now, the main driving forces behind this weaponization of human rights are so-called non-governmental organizations that define themselves as human rights groups. We have a database of around 2,000 such organizations. They come in all shapes and forms, ranging from big ones that everyone here has heard of, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Oxfam, CARE, and so on. Moving to a bunch of Palestinian groups that all of us in the industry and after October the 7th more and more in the Jewish community know of. One such group, it's a major win, was actually designated today by the US Treasury, Adamir, which is a Palestinian West Bank-based organization that serves as an NGO front for the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a Palestinian terror organization. And there's a bunch of those who literally serve as the political arm of Palestinian terror groups. And then ranging all the way to random groups like a German group called the that even in Germany no one has heard of when I mention that name. But the one common denominator between all these is that they obsess about Israel, they claim to work to solve the conflict, they promote human rights, but in so doing, they promote anti-Semitism, they legitimize terror and romanticize it oftentimes, they promote BDS, they literally attack Israel's right to exist and the safety of the global Jewish community. I like to say that actually we're looking at a political warfare today, which is complementary to the physical war. So you have a campaign that seeks to normalize and oftentimes even romanticize Hamas. I mean, in which world do we have a situation that BBC legitimizes a conversation whether Hamas is a terror group or they should be called militants? How did we even get to that place? And this is after October the 7th, right? So they would want you to believe that they are freedom fighters, occupation fighters, as opposed to, instead of calling them for what they are. But that is only one side of that political campaign. The second goal is to actually continue to erode the legitimacy of the State of Israel, of IDF, and in so doing, weaken our ability to defend ourselves. Because when the State of Israel and its institutions, including the army, have to busy themselves of how what we do looks like, and whether our soldiers are going to be persecuted at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, or in the eyes of the media, then that directly influences our ability to defend ourselves. And in that, it is a complementary campaign. I've been saying this since October the 7th, and I claim this with responsibility. The physical war is horrible, and it has and will sadly continue to take a toll. But that is not an existential threat to us. We have a strong army and an even stronger country and an even stronger technology, and combined, we are, as we have seen, we are able to defend ourselves. I mean, I was sitting in LA in a meeting when I get an app notification that in 10 minutes there will be a red alert in my home in Petah Tikva. Like, this is where we are. But the political warfare against us is the truly existential front, because they are going after the core of what we are and who we are as a community and as a state. And if there's one thing that is positive that happened after October the 7th, that is the fact that the genie is out of the box, meaning there is no question that contemporary anti-Semitism is in most cases today Israel-centered and Israel-connected. And even the statistics show this. According to the 2024 ADL report that tracks the anti-Semitic incidents, 58% were connected about Israel. But there is a parallel report done by the Israeli government that shows that it's actually 70%. So if anyone before October the 7th would wanted the discussion to be there's anti-Semitism and then there's criticism of the State of Israel, I think those lines are completely erased now. So we do two things. We, on one hand, document the activities of these organizations and how, instead of promoting human rights, they spread anti-Semitism, they are affiliated to terror groups, they incite to violence, they call for the alienation of the State of Israel. But on the other side, we do an even more important thing. We follow the money. And now you understand why I mentioned my background. Why? Because a lot of these groups are actually funded through your taxpayer dollars. When people talk about the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, we all think that humanitarian aid is flour and medication and tents or clothes. What most people don't know is that somewhere around a third of aid goes to, and I quote, political advocacy projects. When the United Nations launched an emergency appeal in the last quarter of 2023, which is the 3 months following October the 7th, they asked for $1.6 billion from the international community. Now, international community is basically 30 DAC developed countries according to OECD, which, just so you put the numbers also in the context, it's US, Canada, EU, and the richer EU member states, a little bit of Japan and Australia. This is the international community. When they say international community, this is it. $1.6 billion, and they stated 3 objectives that should be met with this money. The third one was political advocacy. Let's dig into what that really means. When you look into the organizations that receive that money and that do political advocacy projects for Palestinians, instead of promoting the right of Palestinian women in the Palestinian society or to advocate for the Palestinian child to have access to better education or healthcare, they are the ones filing submissions at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. They are the ones who co-authored the South African claim at the International Court of Justice. When we analyzed the South African claim, we saw the 22 footnotes led to Palestinian NGO reports, proving that Israel systematically violates human rights and international law, that it starves, applies apartheid now, genocide, and so on and so on. It was the Palestinian NGOs enjoying aid money that first launched the apartheid libel, then the genocide libel. It is the same groups that in the last 18 months have been systematically suing US, UK, Danish, German, Dutch government to try to basically impose an arms embargo on Israel. When they figured out that they cannot push the American administration, most certainly the new one, to budge, they found a loophole. So they sued the Dutch and the UK government because some of the US F-35 components were stored in British and Dutch warehouses as part of the military cooperation, and they tried to basically apply legal pressure, we call it lawfare, to abuse the legal systems to not supply military aid to Israel. Take another one, ESG, right, for all the businessmen in the room. When a pension fund or an investment fund advises their clients on how to invest their portfolio, they have to go to rating companies. Rating companies rate businesses. Part of the rating, we still live in the progressive world, is a human rights rating. I don't know how many of you knew this. And the Palestinian groups have penetrated this market, and they are the ones providing reports about what is the human rights rating for the companies doing business in Israel or with Israel. Now, most of the people would assume that they focus on those companies doing business behind the green line, right, the 67 line. But what you don't know is that, they would have a report against Caterpillar that has supplied Israeli, not even military, Israeli police with bulldozers that were used to vacate illegal Bedouin settlements in the Negev. This is the campaign. This is the magnitude of the campaign that we're looking at. And don't get me even started on campuses. I always like to put my talks in the local context. And I arrived yesterday, but I've been listening very carefully to what hurts the people here the most. And it is the fact that California had 11 campuses in camps, that the 3 California universities were in the top list in terms of the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents and the highest concentration of anti-Israel organizations on campuses. And it is the same NGOs doing all this in the name of human rights. Last year we launched a mapping project and we mapped 157 organizations operating on US campuses. But more interestingly, and there was a new, we discussed this earlier, there's a new study that was released a few days ago that speaks about 1,000 groups, but they count 310 SJP chapters as, standalone organizations. But what was more interesting is actually that we could show at least 3,000 4,000 connections between these groups, showing that none of this was organic or spontaneous. And they operate like an army. Speaking of campaign, some of these groups are legal groups and they give legal counsel or file lawsuits. Some are research groups. They will provide talking points, facts and figures, and so on. Some are fiscal sponsors. When we analyze, at the end of the day, it's the same 6 fiscal sponsors behind most of these groups. And some are grassroots that actually mobilize, but they all work in orchestra together. As you see, it's a global campaign, and they work. They have the common denominator and one amazing vehicle, which is the non-for-profit organizations. And it is mind-boggling to me, as someone who comes from the business sector. I like to look at markets. And I like to say there's 3 markets to my mind in any one society. There is the public sector, there is the business sector, the private sector, and in both we have the same standards that apply, right? There are the rules, there are the laws, and if anyone breaches them, there is the law that applies sanctions. I mean, both CEOs of major companies and our elected officials can be taken down over one wrong tweet. They're being held accountable. Yet when we come to the civil society, to the NGO sector, none of this applies. All you have to do is say that you fight for justice, right? That you are fighting for the human rights. And no one even asks you any questions, let alone to show, where your information comes from and what you're basing it on. Our power, ultimately, is that all our research is based on open source information, which is just a fancy word for Googling it. And we keep insisting on it, and we have tried, and a lot of people have come to us in organizations and companies saying, use search engines, use AI, use things that can help you. The thing is that there are 2 reasons why we actually don't. The human element cannot be replaced. By now we know these groups. We know how they tick, we know how they operate, we know where they are. But it's more than that. I want to be able to sit in front of a congressman and be able to say, if I can Google it, so can you. You don't need an intelligence service. You don't need a CAI to go and vet every NGO that USAID funds around the world. All you need to do is to have one staffer to look at their social media accounts, and you'll find ample evidence. And the second reason is actually that most of the times you don't need 1,000 examples. 3 or 4 solid examples of them calling for the destruction of the state of Israel, or saying that resistance in all its forms is our right and duty, which basically means legitimizing terror, right? Or calling for one-state solution. You don't need much more than that. Or that you can show that most of their employees are affiliated to terror organizations. And we have been able to systematically do this over the years. I said in the beginning that what we do is not just for the sake of research. Our mandate is not really to educate the public. Our mandate is to bring tangible, measurable impact and results. So over the last 5 years, our research has helped cut at least $200 million in governmental funding alone to anti-Israel groups. And I say at least because there's very little transparency in this field. So the $200 million is what we can actually account for and count. But this is not even the biggest impact, because I can cut the funding. I can go to a government and cut funding to one terror-affiliated group. But if I don't work with the elected officials and teach them how in the world did this government end up choosing a terror-affiliated organization as a partner to provide humanitarian aid or promote human rights in the Palestinian society, then they might not fund this one again, but they'll fund another one. So it is a much more difficult impact to bring about, but a much the one with a longer-term result to get the governments to change the funding policies. And we have been able to change these policies in at least 18 countries in the last 5 years, which includes passing a law. Germany, in November, passing a law that says anyone who does not recognize Israel's right to exist will not get a dime of German governmental money. Now, I want to share an anecdote with you that is, I cannot, it happened in early December, and I keep trying to imagine the meeting, and it's difficult for me because my mind I cannot wrap my mind around it. Following the legislation that was passed in the Bundestag, a few Israeli anti-Israel NGOs, if anyone tells you that we are not a democracy, this is the ultimate proof that we are. They were summoned to the German embassy in Tel Aviv, and they were asked a simple question: do you recognize Israel's right to exist? And they could not say yes. And then the German diplomat said, well, we are really sorry, but we will have to cut the funding to you. Can you picture for a second this interaction with the German diplomat asking this question, an Israeli organization in Israel, and they could not utter the words in Israel, yes we do. Now, that's the easy part. Okay, why am I sharing it? It is very emblematic of the problem, but this is also the easy part. Why? Because it's easy to do that in Israel, which is a democracy, vis-a-vis the Israeli organization. Now we have to push the German government to do the same with Palestinian groups. Because there, to get them to say, do you or do you not, to even sit them down for a conversation is a completely different thing. But the Dutch government passed a similar law 2 months later. The Swedish government, after October the 7th, they asked their governmental aid agency to run an internal review to make sure that none of the Swedish money goes to Hamas or other terror-affiliated organizations. When they send the report, because we've been working with the parliamentarians for years, they came to us behind the scenes and said, okay, we don't really trust our aid agency. Speaking of ridiculous things happening out there, can you evaluate for us their evaluation? And then we were able to pretty easily show that their evaluation was ridiculous. Because think of it, it took them 3 months and they didn't even screen a single social media account of any one of the organizations. That's just one of the examples. So they froze all funding, pending still. They haven't still decided what will be the new allocation. And I can go on and on with similar examples. Only after October the 7th, take European Union that froze all funding, and then based on our report, and all we did was we took the list of the Palestinian NGOs that were funded by the EU, and we showed how they reacted to October the 7th. Needless to say, none of them condemned it. Some of them glorified it. Some accused Israel for making it up in order to grant legitimacy to itself to invade Gaza, and so on and so on, right? Based on this, not only did they cut 28 million euros in funding to a few of these groups, but more importantly, they added a contractual condition, an anti-incitement clause, only in contracts with Palestinian NGOs. So this is the type of the work that we do. It's not always flashy, it's not always sexy, it's not always easy to share in the media, but at the end of the day, the haters are always going to hate, and we can never eradicate all of them. The one thing that we can do is regulate the public space. Draw clear red lines. When they are crossed, there will be a sanction. Now, if we trust our respective governments to do that, we will not get far, as we have all seen, even before October the 7th, but definitely since October the 7th. So we have to whisper into their ears, what are those red lines? We have to teach them what is anti-Semitism today. How many of you have heard of the IHRA working definition on Holocaust, on anti-Semitism? So it is a working definition that actually does address this. It is a practical one that has examples attached to it. Half of the examples deal with the white supremacy, far right, what we call old school anti-Semitism. The other half deals with Israel-connected anti-Semitism and says things like, if you accuse an Orange County member of the Jewish community because something that the state of Israel has done, you're an anti-Semite. Because you're basically evoking a medieval anti-Semitic trope that accuses a local Jew of dual loyalty, right? Because you're basically identifying him with the state of Israel, and he's not Israeli, he's an American citizen or a German citizen. It says things like calling Israel or equating it to a Nazi Germany is anti-Semitic. Calling for the destruction of Israel or denying its right to exist is anti-Semitic. Now, it is all amazing, and so far 46 countries have adopted it, but it means nothing unless we push them to enforce it, unless we teach a Lufthansa flight attendant on a flight between, Berlin and Dubai, where there is an identifiable Jew, right, that is attacked by someone on the plane. Now, it begs the question, how does that flight attendant know, is it a hate crime? Is it an anti-Semitic incident, or is it not? How does a police officer, when he places an arrest, know if it's a hate crime or not? We assume that everyone knows, but we shouldn't. We should educate, we should train, and we should push the system to implement and to enforce. In 2008, there was an arson attempt in a synagogue in Wuppertal, in a small city in Germany. And 2 Palestinian guys were arrested. And they were brought in front of the judge, and the judge said it's criminal, but it's no hate crime. They were merely expressing their political frustration by setting a synagogue on fire. In 2025, in same Germany, that would not happen, because in the meantime, Germany adopted the IRA working definition, legislated it, and is applying it. It is being sanctioned for those who. This is the space that we populate, and this is what we advocate for, and we work with governments on the record, off the record, behind the scenes. Some of our successes we can share publicly, some we choose not to, and those are usually the biggest ones, when we can create a situation in which the government itself can take pride for leading the way. So that's the type of the work that we do. I know that Yossi, you have you want to navigate the conversation with me.
She can talk a lot, and I can
Yes.
talk a lot. Right. So Olga mentioned and concentrated one source of funding, that is the 30 countries of the advanced world. Okay, but there's other countries that are less advanced that actually now give probably larger share of the money every year. Countries like Qatar, Iran, now Russia and China. Okay, they're all funding anti-Semitic websites, anti-Semitic NGOs. There's a whole network of them. So if you look at the US network of NGOs, most of them are not funded by the US government directly. I'll explain how they do fund it. They're funded by foreign countries, okay? And then they spread it around, okay? But there's other sources of NGO funding, and that is your tax exemption. Okay, so an NGO in the United States, 501c3, is entitled to tax-free treatment. Okay, that is, if I give my money to a certain cause, which is not supposed to be political cause, okay, and basically I get a deduction. Well, that is what's happening right now. A lot of the funding that we're looking at internally in the US, okay, not coming from the government, coming from the private sector, but it is your money eventually, okay, because it's a tax deduction. Okay, so your tax, people not paying taxes, so you will pay taxes to fund these organizations. And what we found lately is something very, very interesting. I don't know if you're watching the LA riots, you see Palestinian flags and Mexican flags and all this kind of like that. That's not by coincidence. Recent studies of the funding routes of American NGOs shows that the main funders for every one anti-Israel, anti-Jewish organization that they fund 10 others, anti-American organizations with no relations to Israel at all. So the Israel-Palestinian issue is not their main issue. Okay, if I'm looking at Tides Foundation or Soros or this guy, they fund hundreds and thousands of organizations with clear goal, anti-American. It's not by that I'm saying it because I don't believe in their politics, right or left. Read what they say, okay? There's a book, if you want to read it, called The Soros Agenda, okay? He talks about everything that Soros did, okay? He never sued anybody on that book. You know why? Because the entire book is quotes for what he said. What's his goal for each organization? Why is he funding that? Why is he not funding that, etc.? And it's all, you read it, it's disaster. He says, I want to destroy the current system. I don't believe in it, I want to destroy it, okay? So what we're looking at today is a whole system gained to destroy America, and at the same time also Jews and Israel. So this is just a bigger picture, funded by a lot of internal American organizations with tens of billions of dollars, living under our own tax system with tax-free status. But now it's getting worse. Why? Because the Qataris don't need tax-free status. They worked so far until now largely through NGOs. In the last 2 years, they realized they don't care about the deduction really. They're now funding. So the NGOs, one of the tools that NGO Monitor is using is the reporting of NGOs. Okay, they have to report who are their board, who is their funders, address, who they give money to. Not all, but a large, pretty good amount of information is public. Okay. Well, they just work now through private companies, and private companies have no reporting requirement except one. Taxes every year, okay? So if you're making zero, you don't have to report all the way to, I mean, you say I made $100,000 income, you don't have to say where it's from. I lost $90,000, I don't owe any taxes, goodbye. That is what they're now using. So what we're looking, for example, in the K-12 space, it's a lot of actually not NGOs. There's a lot of NGOs there, fighting Israel, etc. But there's a lot of just regular companies that provide services to school districts to train them on how to penetrate anti-Semitism. So now it's becoming even more and more difficult to trace all the money flows because there is no tracing mechanism for money flow in private companies today. There is a tracing mechanism if they use crypto, by the way. Which is all, that's where people specialize in that, not NGO Monitor. There are organizations specializing on crypto flows, which is what they also use because they're trying to activate some of the more criminal elements, okay? So when they're activating a Chilean gang in LA, okay, so just to give you an idea, remember the riots in LA, in UCLA, right? Mm-hmm. So they had guards, they didn't let people get in and out, okay, and stuff like that, didn't let them people. The guards were from a radical semi-mafia, Spanish mafia organization in San Diego. They got paid. Okay, there was not a free ideological one. Somebody paid money for a semi-criminal organization known to the San Diego police to be the guards around the encampment in UCLA. So we're looking at a system that started as an NGO, as a tools to kidnap them, to kidnap the UN money, the German money, the UK money, etc. Now the Qataris are in, the Russians are in, everybody is funneling in, and the main target is actually not us, as Jews. We're only, I would say now, collateral damage, or tools for them to reach an end to take down the United States. If you look at the Chinese, for example, the Chinese are actually pro-Semitic. They are not anti-Semitic. The actual Chinese that you'll talk to in the street actually loves Jews and loves Israel. The government decided that pushing anti-Semitism in the United States will weaken the United States, which is their strategic goal. So now TikTok, which is owned 100% by the Chinese, is pushing anti-Semitic content all the time. Not because they hate Israel, okay, or anti-Israeli content, it's because in order to weaken the United States. So the funding network, which used to be small and then large and NGO-based only, Now it's country-based, companies-based, and NGO-based.
And if I can just complement and strengthen what you're saying, as someone who comes from Eastern Europe, open society, Soros, Rockefeller, it's the same structures. They've been on this for decades. I was 2 weeks ago. I was invited to testify in a special hearing at the Slovak government. Why? Because they have a situation where Soros and a few of other similar foundations have been, for the last couple of years, funding major NGOs on the Russia-Ukraine issue, but not to change just the hearts and minds of the public. They raised 4 million euros and bought weapons for Ukrainians on soil of Slovakia, like without consulting with the government. And but then when the government wanted to look into who gave the money, how it was a crowdsourcing campaign, of course, but there was no transparency. Did it come from 2 people, or did it come from 10,000 individual smaller donors? They staged months-long demonstrations. When the dictatorship in former Yugoslavia fell apart, Soros was the first one to come in and help build democracy, which is basically weaken what they American influence in Europe, and seemingly push the entire Central Eastern European bloc quasi towards Brussels, which is again critical against Washington. So it really is a global campaign, and I think what you're saying, Yossi, goes to strengthen that it always starts with the Jews, but we are never the reason. It never ends with the Jews. And the level of anti-Semitism in any one society is actually the best barometer in terms of how unwell the society is doing in terms of the liberties and freedoms. And I think it's the low point that we have reached. So just to...
So it's very difficult to fight it, okay? So you can pass a law, etc. But for example, we have a lot of laws that can fight it here. But then the judge has to decide that he's going to do something, and they don't like it. In many places, okay? First, the government has to get involved. Only for the last 4 years, it didn't. This government started to get involved, but again, they are also limited. They have to go to a court. If you go to court in New York, the likelihood that you'll get a judge that is sympathetic to the NGOs or to the Palestinians is 80%, okay? So you're basically going to lose most of your trials, okay? Can you go back? And that takes years. Okay, so the system is very, very slow, also the legal system. So we actually have very, very interesting, it's very difficult to stop. One of the tools, I think you were involved in that as well, but if your organization gave the Treasury a list of organizations and proofs that they're not meeting, that they're actually terror organizations and funding organizations, and they think just today shut their funding down and their studies, etc. These are 10. Guys, we are talking, okay, 10,000 entities worldwide. Okay? They have funding mechanisms that go to South Africa, that go through Liberia, and you'll find that Hezbollah has a whole funding network in Western Africa. Why? It's all these funneling of money around the world is very, very complicated to trace. Or government don't want to go after that. It's a lot of work. You have to work like 4 or 5 years, collect data, find the proof, go to a court. They can immediately go to a court and they'll find a judge. How easy it is to find a judge that will reverse it, and then you have to go spend money, go all the way to the Supreme Court in order to get a resolution. And this is not just on the Jewish issue, it's on every issue that they care about. It's a monster that we're fighting. The good thing, I think, that we all have to remember is that we are not the only one that see that. Okay? So what do you think most Americans see in the LA today? Do they see peaceful demonstration that they're trying to tell us? What? They see peaceful. What do they see? They see Palestinian flag. What do you think the connotation in their head is? People that don't speak, but they vote, okay, and they think about it, okay? So, and people think about the takeover of their societies and their streets and their university. When people find out today all these things, they don't want, they support what the government is doing, even if they support it quietly, okay? They want police and army in LA, okay? They're not telling you, they're not gonna come and speak because most people don't speak, okay? They think about it, but they don't dare to speak because they don't want to be marginalized, etc. But the deep, deep down support, okay, also for Israel and the Jews, okay? Don't believe the surveys, okay? The deep down regular American is not brainwashed. The brainwashed ones are the young ones, okay? That's where the problem is, okay? But the regular American is still very, very strong with Jews in Israel, okay? The right-wing skinheads are still like a few thousand. There's not that many of them. So kind of remember, most people are with us. The more they come out, it actually helps us because it mobilizes the government, okay? So right now, when the Trump administration is going after universities, it's not just because of anti-Semitism, right? It's because they now realize it's all connected. It's the same network of anti-America, okay? So we are, and by the way, it's not only them. I remind you, for example, the TikTok law, all right, to shut down TikTok, which they're trying to sell and not, etc. But basically, that TikTok law was a bipartisan law. Okay, was passed. Why? Because more and more, it's not just a Republican issue; it's an American issue, and people see it, and they see it. The more it's getting exposed, which is part of what they do, you have to repeat until people say "OS." Okay, and that's it. Then the system starts moving, and that's what we have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. In not just NGO monitors and others like that. Today, I'm sorry that I raised some other organization. There was a new report that came by ISGAP about $1 billion that was given by Qatar to Georgetown. Okay, Georgetown is where most of our government employees are trained. Okay?
And last year they also exposed that there was Qatar owned the nuclear program in Texas at the university.
Texas A&M.
The entire nuclear research in the department of the
So you ask yourself, they're very strategic about their events. They give money to Northwestern because that's the journalism school. Now they go from the journalism school there to Al Jazeera, to AJ Plus, to New York Times, and they keep repeating the same bad messages. And then there's also, there's also Texas A&M, which we wonder why they gave them $700 million, and then we found out they have the most important nuclear program in the United States, and they were basically having terminals in Doha with Iranian people sitting on them downloading all our nuclear secrets.
While we talk sanctions against the nuclear proliferation in Iran,
So anyway, I think maybe we will stop and give people a few minutes for questioning. You were raising your hand for half an hour now.
I have a question. Like we're talking about Qatar, but there's also a lot of Jewish people that donate money to those organizations. I have friends that donate to the UN. I have friends that will participate in the Women's March and donate to that. I have friends that lead the initiative that create internships that Jews cannot do. I have a lot of friends, Israelis, Jews, and when I go to people and I go to I have a good friend who's working with the Rosie Project. They're like, okay, where does anti-Semitism come from? They're like, well, we're not sure. We're going to do research. Nobody knows. So it's like, why there is this still lack of acceptance that certain groups, especially in the far left, are just fundamentally anti-Semitic, like Greta and like that, just kind of who they are in the DNA.
Well, look, I can give you my take on that. I think that we're not in a fair fight, okay? We are part of democratic, regulated way of thinking. In our societies, in our communities, we think like lawyers, right? Something happens, we have to check, we have to write a statement, then our legal department has to vet it before we send it out. On their end, they spread lies, half-truths, and they send them out. They don't care. But the goal that we have is different. Their goal is to evoke an emotion. An emotion is an amorphous, thing. It's very subjective and it's a one-liner. we can never really fight the emotion. I mean, Yossi and I had this conversation earlier. The Greta is a gimmick. There are two sides to that story. Number one, it's a gimmick, and she sent out the emotion, and no one's gonna check what was on the yacht, as they call it. It wasn't really a ship; it was a celebrity yacht with less than one truck worth of aid, you know. But there was coverage, and they were tweeting, and there was a whole campaign. Now, we on our end, and I kept watching and reading, and I was horrified at the amount of Israelis and Jews that were tweeting, retweeting, commenting, sharing, and talking and reporting. You know, you would have like real news in Israeli primetime news, and then the next thing was where Greta is. Like, we are giving it air. We are also within our echo chamber, and a lot of these things, if we stop talking about them and obsessing with them, she wouldn't have audience. But now the fight is also not on the. It's not a fair fight. You know, Yossi talks about transparency and exposing. We've seen that, you know, we go after one NGO, and it takes us years to collect information, to build a campaign. I can tell you that in 2019, this has nothing to do with October the 7th, there was a terror attack in August on the outskirts of Jerusalem in which a 17-year-old Rina Schnurr was brutally murdered in an explosive. 2 months later, in December, Ynet released a story and said PFLP is responsible for this, a 50-people terror cell. When we looked at the 50 names, we saw that 9 were employees, senior employees of 6 Palestinian human rights organizations. The Israeli government, first of all, it took them 2 years to designate them, which blows one's mind, okay? But
That's
once,
fast. That's
yeah.
fast.
But once they did, okay, the European governments that were funding these 6 groups said, we haven't seen compelling evidence. In which universe is this like, imagine a parallel situation where US Treasury today designates 10 organizations, and then 5 countries in Europe say, yeah, we're not gonna, this particular designation we're not really gonna, you know, respect. And then, also on our end, the Israeli government says, okay. And then we ran a 3 years public campaign based on open source information, publicly verifiable information to cut funding. So we're now, in the meantime, half of these 6 organizations created parallel organizations in Europe, circumventing the Israeli designation, because the designation, for all the financial experts in the room, basically mean financial restrictions against the organization. It means that you can raid their offices, you can confiscate goods, you can prevent them from receiving funds, you know, you can shut down their accounts. It's a financial tool. So it's very difficult to fight them. You know, Hindra Job, everyone has heard of this. This is the Brussels-based foundation that has been going after the IDF soldiers. Not the Ramatkal, not the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister, and they have been going after the kids that after the army go, you know, backpacking in Latin America. Now they are a front, just a more militant front for Al-Haq. Al-Haq is the biggest Palestinian human rights organization. Now, how do they operate? Al-Haq is the one standing at the plenary in the United Nations and filing a legal submission that, and I quote, this is in the summer of 2023, before October the 7th, that is not Israel, but the Zionist movement that was created 125 years ago was created as a tool to systematically steal indigenous natural resources of the indigenous Palestinian people, aka water. And as a proof, they state Mekorot, the state water company, that, by the way, provides water to the Palestinian Authority, right? As a proof of, and this is all done by applying racist, apartheid-like policies. I mean, this is the type of narrative. Now, but that's legal language. As a parallel to that, you have Indra Job that uses the same tools, but just shoots hundreds of arrest, alerts around the world. And we, on our side, are supposed to operate within the purview of the democratic society and vetting every piece of fact and information and how we do it. So it's not so much why, but I think it's how. And I agree with Yossi that there's a change of trends, and US is not the only place where more conservative voices, way beyond the Jewish community, are definitely on the rise. But Europe, in the last 10 plus years, has been going steadily right-wing. Europe has never had this many right-wing governments in power since the Second World War, which could be scary in a way, but for us right now, and for what we are talking about, is the only sane thing to sort of balance it
Let's
up.
get a few more question.
There is for the last 20, 25 years, the unholy alliance between the green and the red, okay? And until the European countries and Israel is just a side, they are for destroying the Western civilization, and doesn't work. How can progressive for women and gay rights be with the Muslim Brotherhood that exactly the opposite? That's the goal, and until the Western society, including
What's the
United States,
question? What's the question?
No, the question is coming now.
It's a
It's
Jewish
okay.
question.
Because a lot of people, that's a state for you. A lot of people don't realize. Second, why they can't operate freely in Israel. There's 150 NGOs that work against Israel and they get tax exemption. What is going on in Israel?
I'll answer that.
Go ahead.
Since I have a lot of experience with the legal system or the non-legal system in Israel, as you want to call it, they're basically protected by a left-wing protected Supreme Court. Bottom line. Okay? And a totally ineffective government coalition, that no matter what it is, okay? No matter whether it's now the Bibi one or the Bennett one or whatever, that never took that as an important thing, because had they passed the right laws in Israel, which they haven't. The laws in Europe are better to fight this than the laws in Israel. Okay?
They try.
No, they haven't. Trust me. When they want to pass laws, they can pass laws. Okay?
And also the last law that was tabled was a stupid one.
They can pass laws, and then it makes it more difficult. But right now there's no laws, or the laws are very, very relaxed, etc., which allows the Supreme Court to interpret everything as they want, etc. And you try today to shut down an NGO in Israel, good luck. I can tell you, I'm trying. It is 100% a failure of a left-wing Supreme Court and a totally ineffective government coalitions of the right and the left.
What about the tax exempt? They don't need to go to court. The tax exempt can be taken away.
No, you can't. The court will immediately take it down. So you have to have
But part of that problem is not only on the Israeli side. Part of the problem is that the European governments continue funding these groups. B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence and Gisha and Yesh Din and Who Profits are all Israeli NGOs, and they
have tools. The Israeli government can declare them criminal under the Interpol Convention that they have, and they're not doing it. It's a political issue with the Israeli government. All right, please.
I don't know, I'm sorry I came late, it was a rough transition. Did you talk at all about CARE? And can you talk about CARE and like who is actually like,
So CARE, okay, so first of all, CARE was founded up many years ago, I don't remember how many it was. The Holy Land Foundation was founded as the main funding mechanism for Hamas, okay? And it was shut down with a big trial, very successful trial in the United States government against the Holy Land Foundation. Some of the people were arrested. There were a lot of co-conspirators. So then they decided they're going to be much smarter, and they learned from the experience what they did wrong and what they did. And the same people that were left, that didn't go to jail or deported from the United States, basically established CARE. CARE is very difficult to nail. They know what they're doing, okay? They're very difficult. They get tons of money from Qatar, okay? But they know what they're doing. So it's very difficult to catch them on something illegal, okay? Everything they do, according to US law, is legal, okay? Funding a student chapter, until that student chapter is not defined as a terror organization, you're allowed to fund a student chapter. So we know CARE is the big problem. CARE has people in the FBI, okay, from the Obama days. I mean, this is like huge penetration. So CARE was during the Biden, was part of the anti-Semitism declaration. CARE was involved, okay? So we have a problem. People are trying to go after them. I believe the current administration was going to be more helpful in that. And also a lot of NGOs and lawyers, etc. But they are the biggest, hardest target to catch. That I can tell you. Yes, please.
I have a two-part question. So the first part is, why is such an uncommitted, tactless response from the United States government? We have experience of fighting organizations like this with mafia. We've done it. Why isn't there another organization under Department of Justice? So that's question number one. And the other part is on Israeli side. There is a failure of imagination. We're winning kinetic war. We're losing the soft war. Why isn't there something done on Israeli side?
I'll answer the American, you answer the Israeli.
You're giving me the hotter potato.
After the American. So the recent Trump administration actually enacted two executive orders, two task forces. Okay? The first one is the anti-Semitism task force. You may have seen Leo Terrell, who's heading it, it's more a figurehead, etc. But there are resources now in the FBI and in the Department of Education and others and they're just hiring. It's going to be, we're not going to see a lot for at least a year. They're just hiring people. It takes time when the new administration comes in to replace the people, get into preparing materials for this. It's not like, okay, we're doing it. You have to go to court or something, or be able to protect yourself in court. We're going to see results. I think there's significant resources, and it's a huge priority for the president. Personally, people, no matter what you say, I can tell you it's a huge priority for him personally, anti-Semitism task force. The less known task force, which may be more meaningful, and where what you said may be, is called the 10-7 task force. Since about 50 Americans were killed in October 7, and the same thing happened after 9/11, we established internally a task force to go after everybody who participated, helped, supported everything, and do the maximum we can do with them. And since there's almost 100%, those are the same organization, one and another, I do expect from those two task forces to see some results, but it's not going to be quick. There's no magic here. I mean, you got to do your work.
30 years.
But there's budgets, okay? There are budgets, there are people in the FBI, there are people in the Justice Department, etc. There are budgets to go after them for two reasons. Okay, one on anti-Semitism, the other one, Americans were killed by somebody like in 9/11, we're going to go after them.
And on the Israeli side, I mean, I cannot speak for the Israeli government, right? And I could give you the long answer that, that pretty much echoes what I said before. It's not a fair war, but at the end of the day, the Israeli government has not and continues to not really see this as a strategic or an existential threat. They, unfortunately, and this is my personal view and experience, even since October the 7th, there hasn't really been a shift in paradigm in Israel, and they still think that, it's fluffy things, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting BDS. They still call it asbara. I mean,
as a strategic or
it's
right. And that there hasn't been a significant
I was listening to you.
They call it asbara, which is an Israeli word to explain. We're going to explain the world, why we are right. And
You hear about anywhere in business that has a vice president of explaining?
If they took it seriously, they would have the tools to.
I've got to go, guys. I have hundreds of other commitments. We were supposed to do it before, but she'll do well. Thank you, Yossi.
I mean, I'm so jet lagged, I can do this forever. So as long as you have questions.
I'm going to ask you, it's not really a question, but first of all, I want to thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And Yossi, if you're doing from top down. I want to have a call to action of all of you to do bottom up. Because I see a lot of things that's happening. A lot of people here live in Irvine. I used to live for 40 years in Irvine. We used to have a mayor called Farrah Khan. She's the one who told urban police to stand down and dismantle and copy PCI. Now you have another mayor, Larry Akers, supposedly a Jew, used to be my mayor years back. He speaks at CARE convention every year on their own accord. So my call to action to it is, they're doing an excellent job. We got to do our part from the bottom up. Get involved with local community, get involved with school boards, get involved with the city council, mayorship, to try to push them out. Because until we do that, they will continue to be poisoning the young minds, and we're going to see this over and over again. Well, commercial now, but this is how I feel. I mean, we started Israel Global Foundation. We have still 501c3. We're doing a lot of things. I'm doing 1-hour TV show. Mary was there talking about her mother. But the point is, we got to attack from all possible ways. Not just frontal assault. We got to go flanks, behind it. We got to be partisans, okay? And just, let's kick their butts.
At the end of the day, and I agree with you, people ask me, so who's going to win? It's not it's like a box match in which the game is not going to be over by a knockdown. It's not that their side or our side is just going to fall. It's a game of exhaustion, and the winner will be the last man standing in the ring. So they win some, we win some, and as long as we persist and we keep fighting back, and there's many, many different mini fronts, they all interconnect. They're all funded through the same sources or similar sources. They all echo the narratives and they use the same lines, but in each front, we have to talk about schools, we have to talk about campuses, we have to talk about our city halls, we have to talk, each of these is a front. I work, as you say, top down, because I go straight to the parliament, because I cannot work in every municipality around the world, but the same tools that we apply for the national governments, you can apply for the city hall and hold them accountable. On one hand, education, train them. Do not assume that people know what is anti-Semitic. And when they tell us, it is insane. I was a Jewish student leader in Europe, and in my times it was still interfaith dialogue. And it was all super sexy to have the Jews and the Muslims talk together, and the Christians would always, facilitate, of course. It was amazing.
I think you left that.
I have to tell you a really funny story. We were a bunch of kids, right? We were in our 20s, and they brought us to Assisi in Italy, orchestrated by Vatican. Assisi, it's a city where one of their saints was born or was revealed. It was organized and hosted by the Vatican. So we get there and we are 40 religions. I never knew there are 40 religions around the world, but they assembled us. And then they wanted to have a joint statement. And the joint statement, on behalf of 40 religions, starts, in the name of the Father and the Holy Spirit. This is not really happening.
There's a saying, faith is real and religion is good business.
Yeah. It is a big. But what was the funny part? And this is another battlefield. All these, we had Jains and Zoroastrians and, I don't know, Hindu, and they had 40 religions, and all of them were lovely, peace, spirituality-seeking people. I was the only person who said, what are you talking about? Because I was the only politician, so to speak, in the room. So even if it's
Were you the only Jew?
yeah, we were the only representing, the only Jewish organization. I said, I ain't signing this. There's no Holy Spirit and no Father. What are you talking about? And then we started a whole negotiation, which was not an easy one, to paraphrase the statement. And but even that, when they, on one hand, it's education. Do not assume that other people know what hurts us. And why I started saying this, if anyone else would try to define Islamophobia, the entire Muslim community would be on their heads. But somehow, everyone is invited to tell us what constitutes anti-Semitism, what is violent, what is a Jew hatred for us. And I think just guarding the fence before we let them in, we have to be super clear. No, only we know what is offensive to us. But at the same time, I don't believe that most of the people are anti-Semitic. Most of the people don't care. For most of the people, it's like 5 minutes of foreign affairs. Yeah, I don't know, Mita, you want to moderate?
Oh, no, you pick it up.
So-
You know everything, so.
When I was young, I remember the elders used to always say, you don't need to worry about the Arabs, they will never get along, they always fight one another, even when they look strong, they're not. In actuality, we see the opposite. We, as the Jews and pro-Israelis, don't seem to get along, to be united with what do we need to do to fight as a united front. And what we've seen over the last 20, 30, 40 years is these anti-Israel, anti-Semite organizations have a strategy. It's a long-term strategy, and they're very united. They have a common enemy, they know who the enemy is, and I mean, you described they're getting money not just from Qatar and Iran, they're getting money from, from all these 30 governments and others. They're still very much acting in cohesion with one another and on all of these strategies to attack us. So how does that work on that side, and how can we do a better job defending ourselves and attacking back as a united front?
Again, it's just my personal view. I'm a cynic. I don't think you will ever get 5 Jews to pray the same thing. There's going to be 7 shuls, and we're going to have 2 that we don't go to. But I do think that one good thing that came out of October the 7th, and my husband always says to me, he's Israeli, so his sense of humor is a little rougher on the edges than mine. So he says, if our neighbors in Israel were Swedes and Danes, we would have assimilated a long time ago, and half of us would have been tall and blonde and good in basketball. But I think there's something that when we are attacked, that concentrates us towards inwards. And as horrific as the experience this October the 7th has been, and it has been in every possible way, I do see in parallel an awakening. And it maybe not all the Jews in North America, or maybe not enough, but way more than before. And there is an awakening that we need to do a better job at educating our kids. How do I make sure that my kids are Jewish? I took a step and I said my kids will be born in Israel. And I basically limited the chances of them marrying non-Jewish to near 0. But that's not everyone is going to make Aliyah. And I think that we need to be very creative in terms of how do we teach, on one hand, positive relationship to Judaism in a language that kids understand today. What resonated with us doesn't resonate with them today, and we have to the same way. One of the main things that lacks, to my mind, inside of the Jewish community is a business vigor and business approach to things. You know, we are so smart when we run businesses, and we ask ourselves, who's my target audience? Who's my competition? What's my SWOT analysis? You know, what is the right messaging? What is the best commercial? But we don't necessarily have the same approach when we deal with the Jewish community. How do I best sell my product to the kids today? It's another product, especially in today's world with social media and so on. At the same time, we need to give them tools to fight back and not to be afraid to fight back. Just like we shouldn't assume that everyone knows what constitutes anti-Semitism, we should not assume that our kids have the right tools to stand up to, to something to an incident at school or at college. Not just because they don't have the guts. Not everyone is an activist, but let's say that they are. Do they know what they're saying? Do they know what the talking points are? Are we giving them ammunition? So I think there's a lot of internal things that we can do that will, if we do them, and long term, and I agree with you, I said there are no quick solutions here. Because also it took decades to get us here. And so it's not something that we can undo overnight. But if we start doing them, then in a few years, I think we will see a difference. And just like, Nagba and now October the 7th, for them is a defining moment, so it will be for us for many years to come. So
I have to answer this question. The problem is one of framing of the problem. Okay, you can even hear from her answer. Okay, she is working on defining what it is anti-Semitism. The other side has a very simple message. Okay, they are against something. It's always much easier to be against something than to justify something that you are for. We are completely failing to delegitimize the Islamists. Completely. None of us touched that. Nobody's been talking today about any of that stuff, right? So they have a much easier path, and we are still playing to their card game. We are playing on their table. We are using their language, how they define us. You can see that even in Israeli media, okay, with Greta and all of that stuff. Instead of delegitimize the Islamists, we are still in that, oh, they told us this about us, oh, but we're not like that.
But it's also because we're always playing catch up. We're always reacting to something they've done. You should go offensive and reset the table.
Go ahead. I don't know which one to go.
I want to say one thing. I was the president of the Hebrew Academy in Huntington Beach. As the Weinbergs were co-parents, our sons were friends. And I'm saying, I'm not Israeli, I'm American. My parents are Holocaust survivors. Jewish education, when the children are younger, this is the way to bring them into the fore. Because they can't be influenced from the ground up if they have a feeling of Judaism.
They're being hunted right now in colleges, regardless of whether they were educated as Jews or they were not educated as Jews.
No, but they have things to stand up, and that's what
Right,
we're looking
right.
at. They have
They
to
have
follow
no
things.
tools.
Go ahead.
Just a question here. From you, a very simple question.
Hold on, there's
Okay, 1 second.
A simple question, very simple. You're going after hundreds of individual NGOs, groups that seem to mutate and spread out from everywhere. Above them, do you find a common source of funding? In other words, could you find above them 5, 6, 7 sources that all of these organizations get their money from? Because that kind of organization, this is my feeling, that kind of organization and that kind of planning is all central. It isn't all distributed. These people are paid to do this stuff, and they're paid well. Can you find, or do you have the sources for all of this anti-Semitism? It's all bought and paid for.
So we focus on the NGOs, okay?
Right.
And there is governmental funding, and there it's like a fan club, meaning if one of them or a bunch of them manage to raise, to get a grant from the EU, then they're going to go to the Swiss government and the Swedish government and say, look, I got a grant from the EU, and then it becomes even easier to get more governmental funding. And most of these, because there's no government likes to make significant changes. So if they have 15 NGOs that they fund on the Palestinian cause, most of the times they'll just continue renewing the grants over and over and over again. Most of the times, it's not even a matter of is there legislation, is there not. It's a matter that the parliamentarians, the congressmen, they don't have the tools and the resources to even ask critical questions. Once a year, the USAID person will show up at a congressional hearing and usually give a sample report on USAID activities, which is at random. Every time they usually take 2 countries and then they give like a random, and it's usually a report of how awesome it is and how USAID is revolutionizing a third world country and bringing about democracy and feeding children. And the congressmen in the room, their staffers don't have the critical resources to even ask an intelligent question. And the smaller the country, the less the resources. The most MPs in Europe have 1 or 2 staffers to cover all the issues. So that's on the governmental side. And on the private funding side, it's basically the same 10-ish foundations. Open Source Society, which is Soros, Rockefeller, Norwegian Refugee Fund, there's a few big German political foundations that are very vested in this. And like Yossi said, it's not just on the Palestinian issue. Those are the groups that promote sustainable development, democracy, human rights around the world. So it does have a head. It's the same group of targets. And on the NGO side, we have a database of 2,000 organizations, but out of them, we're probably talking around 80 that are truly spearheading the campaign. It's not all the 2,000 that are active all the time. And even within the 80, there's a lot of, we call it revolving doors, meaning, he will even take SJP and AMP, right? So the head of AMP used to be the head of SJP New York chapter. They will go from one organization to another, and it's not that difficult to trace. Now, on one hand, that helps in implicating them, but at the same time, it's more difficult to say that we got Samidun designated in Germany, in the Netherlands. We also got their French affiliate designated in France, and then US and Canada also designated Samidun. But most of their staff went and created parallel organizations, plus no one here went after the other NGOs that are in their ecosystem. So it becomes there's no end to this game.
That brings to my next question. Is there a general method that you've figured out to stop this entire thing? I mean, I see what we're playing here is whack-a-mole, because there are 100 different places where you can be funded. Is there any general way that either the state of Israel or organizations in the United States can stop this at the highest level by saying that this kind of funding, this kind of charity, I guess you'd call it, I don't know the word for it, has to be stopped across the board? In other words, do we have any way to actually get this? Because I see what we're doing as a failure, and it's guaranteed to fail, because if you're trying to find Samdun while 4 other organizations have just been formed right underneath you, you're going to lose. Do we have any way to reach this at the higher levels? The same thing with Qatar. Qatar has billions of dollars. If you can reach Al Thani, you can stop the whole thing. But you have to stop these things at the source, which we're not doing.
So here's the challenge again. How do you do this in a democratic, liberal society, right? If you go and you say, I'm going to shut down all these NGOs, and by the way, speaking of Israeli government, when they try to legislate against NGOs, it makes us look really bad. It makes us look like Russia, like Hungary, like repressive, non-democratic regimes that are going after the civil society. At the end of the day, to criticize one's government is not illegal, right? To protest is not illegal. To fight occupation or to fight against the settlements in Israel, let's address the pink elephant in the room. It's not illegal, right? And that, in a way, to criticize, even to be a conscious objectionist, speaking of breaking the silence, it's not illegal. Do I like it? No. Do I disagree with it? Absolutely. Is it illegal? It's not illegal. So to go after these organizations makes the Israeli government, which already suffers from fragile reputation, look really, really bad. And then I guess the Israeli government, they have tried. Now they try very poorly, and it usually comes from MKs that are furthest to the right, so the ones whispering in their ears are even further to the right, so they only give them even crazier solutions, like impose 80% taxes on NGOs that receive foreign governmental funding. Yeah, but they have the tax deductible status. How is that even legally applicable? Like it's like, I don't know what was the conversation in that MK's office and where was his legal advisor. So it's very difficult in a democratic society to go after them categorically. To my mind, the only thing that we can do is regulate. And what can you do? Unless they are breaking the law or, calling for violence or have ties to terror or anything that is illegal, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's how they abuse the entire system. Yeah.
To go back to the car thing, they, during Zadia, they found like all kinds of trove, like around 2019, they finance.
So I think Qatar is a different thing. I think there should be, apropos regulation, on campuses, there should be regulations, who can fund and what. There should, I'm not against a state funding to something, but there should be a regulation. Can they fund the entire department?
No.
Can they, why not fund the entire university and just, what,
They are doing it.
So there should be the state should impose regulation that regulates that space. The same goes for the groups operating on campus. Can you be a registered organization that operates on campus if you're neither campus-based, nor campus-born, nor organized by students? It makes absolutely no sense. Can you, even in the States, right? Europe is stricter on this because in Europe the freedom of speech goes until here and then it ends. And in the US there's no end to freedom of speech. But even there, okay, there's a difference between freedom of speech and calling for violence or inciting to violence. And at the end of the day, a democratic, law-abiding society can only try to address these issues through regulation. And exposure and pushing for the regulation to be actually enforced. They say that there was a Tel Aviv University study that analyzed the anti-Semitic incidents in the States, and they said that before October the 7th, there was less than 10% arrests being placed following the anti-Semitic incidents. That's an issue to pick up on. That's an issue to say, okay, why is this the case? And where is the flaw? Is it the police officers who do not know how to recognize and properly process the arrest and processes at a hate crime? Is it the judges? Where is the glitch in the system? And not to just call out the whole system. To my mind, we will never win. We don't have the numbers to win the hearts and the minds, but we have the brains. And we need to work like lawyers who go into the footnotes and the nitty-gritty, and then we catch them red-handed. And once we catch them on one incident, we create a precedent, and then we do the economy of scale, because we are the ones, not there, that know that there is that footnote, that needs to be enforced. Yes.
So is it our hubris, the fact that kind of like what happened in Germany in the 1930s, we think we are smart, we are titans of industry, we are doing well, and we think it's not going to happen again because we are smart enough. And so where is that line of, yes, we're smart, yes, we're good, we're all of this, but it can still happen to us? Where is that, because it doesn't seem like we've hit that line yet, oddly enough.
So it's a great question. We're hosting an event in July in Jerusalem, and we were brainstorming about the title, and I titled the event "Never Again." I think that sadly, and it's not necessarily our fault, I think that the Holocaust education at some point became a slogan, right? And that we were, and again, righteously so. Like we do live.
We have a country.
We have a country, and we have we live in democratic societies, and we are way more protected, and so on. But I don't think that we should never fall asleep on the watch. And in that sense, I really believe that October the 7th was a wake-up call, and that there is an awakening. When I say smarter, I mean fight back, but I mean how we fight back. I don't mean that we are smarter and thus we should just let go. I think that when we fight, and we must fight back, and I think that that is the difference between how we, although that is also not doing the European Jewish, the global Jewish community justice. There was an article and a study that was published a couple of weeks ago that spoke about the number of Jewish soldiers fighting against the Nazis in the Second World War, and I would have never guessed the number. How many? Does anyone have an idea of how many? Sorry? 1.5 million.
Wow.
Right? It's an amazing number. Like we all live in this paradigm that we were taken to the camps like cattle. That's not true. And this is the people who wore uniforms. It doesn't matter if they were partisans or American soldiers or in any other, European army that fought back. There was 1.5 million Jews fighting in uniforms. So I think we need to fight back, and we need to fight back really hard, but we need to be smart about how we fight. And we need to leverage our competitive advantage, which is the smarts and not the numbers. Because number-wise, we are never gonna win.
Have you ever found any evidence tying World Economic Forum to any of the activities that you investigate?
No, not in terms of funding. No, I can't say that we have. I can't say that. But could be that we haven't really looked. Could be that they use that platform as well to lobby or whatever, but I haven't seen something, coming out of that. And I haven't seen that Davos was on their map. Sadly, I would have loved to fight them back.
We have a question right here.
Hold on, but there's a question there, and then we'll go there. And you tell me when we stop.
I think, that's 2 questions, so we have a lot to talk.
Talking about being smart, how much technology are you using to track things? Like the NGOs, the people in the NGOs, the activities happening, all the data that you probably have in the social media. We are the startup nation. How much AI is being used? How much this would be a good way to convince congressmen with facts?
Mm-hmm. We almost use no technology, and we tried, and others have tried. Last week I sat in offices of a newly created organization in Tel Aviv that does a similar thing to ours, but just focuses on financial institutions, banks and Stripe and credit card companies and so on. We sat in their offices and they said to me, we brought an intelligence officer from the army, and we brought 3 high-tech guys or whatever, and then he said, but we ended up harvesting your website. And the thing is that on this particular issue, the contextualization is everything. And for that, you need the human element. You need to be able to distinguish between when the word occupation is being used in this context and when it's being used in a context that, okay, so they fight occupation. It's not something that is going to help me with the government to incriminate them. And I'm just using that as one example. So that's number one. Number two, our researchers tend to know these organizations most intimately. Most of the times we can even predict what they're going to do and where they're going to go. Because they go in as a herd, because it's a campaign. So they'll follow each other. And then when we see that one is, tweeting this or tweeting that, then we know that there's more to come. And then we sometimes even put together, towards the end of the year, a campaign forecast. And we present it to the Israeli government. These are the campaigns that you should be watching after. So that's number one. Number two, you don't really need that much volume in terms of examples. Sometimes 3-4 really solid examples are enough to cut funding to a group, and say 6-7 organizations who do the similar thing show a trend that is enough to persuade an MP or a congressman that they should put forth a resolution or a bill. So it's not, if you find a champion, you only need a few solid examples. And number three, if we use technology, then it would be much more difficult for me to tell them that they need to improve their vetting and oversight mechanisms, unless I tell them, and you need to attach, $3 million budget to it, and a department that is going to run the technology, monitor it, and so on. So at the end of the day, as I said before, I sit in front of them and I say, if I can Google it, so can you. It's actually that simple to vet the organizations, and not only in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in any conflict-ridden area, because it's not an isolated. There is much more, right? Focus on Israel, but it's not a unique phenomenon to politicize the conversation and to use NGOs to influence the discourse in the governments. Right? There was one more.
Last one.
Okay.
Okay.
UNRWA. So
Yeah.
we know that UNRWA, there were members that participated October 7th. We know that in their educational organizations, they promote anti-Israel rhetoric. They do all those things. Because it's under the umbrella of the United Nations, what are you able to accomplish there? Is there anything that you could do?
So we are very active at the United Nations. We are also the ECOSOC accredited organization, which means that we have a special UN consultative status. We can file submissions, we can testify, we can hold events in the UN building, because not everyone can just come and do that. But also because UN and the UN Human Rights Council are one of the main fertile grounds for these NGOs. They use it to set a legal precedent, because then they go to the ICC and they say, well, the Human Rights Council passed this resolution, so now you have to reference it in the, in the arrest warrant that the ICC issues. UNRWA, I always say UNRWA is the top of the food chain. Why? Because it has become the symbol for all the UN agencies, and because it's been the most out there. And we know that some of the UNRWA people held hostages, and we know what's going on with the textbooks and in schools and so on. But the UNRWA is not unique in that sense. There is at least 34 UN agencies operating in Gaza and Palestinian territories and East Jerusalem, and they all suffer from the same issue, which is, I'll give you an example. The US has a federal strategy in combating anti-Semitism. So does Germany, so does the EU. All three base it on the IRA working definition. But then all three of those will have framework agreements through which they give hundreds of millions of dollars to the UN, which has absolutely none and has never adopted IRA. They don't even have a strategy on combating anti-Semitism. They don't talk about anti-Semitism. UN doesn't have a terror list. You know, UNICEF, I don't know how many of you know that UNICEF has an annual report on abuse of children's rights around the world, and there have been attempts by Palestinian organizations to add IDF to the blacklist of UNICEF, together with Daesh and Boko Haram, for abusing the rights of the Palestinian children. Because there's absolutely no tools, right? And because when a PFLP affiliate organization struts down the corridors of Geneva or New York, PFLP is not a terrorist organization as per UN. So it's we would need to address UN as a whole, because now everyone's talking replace UNRWA, absolutely. But whoever comes in place of UNRWA will still have to work with 34,000 local people in Gaza to just operate the schools, the kindergartens, you know, to have the network. And unless there are clear red lines and oversight mechanisms and pre-described sanctions, because I always use the Serbian example, you know, when they first said use the buckle up when you drive. And then they passed a law, and the next morning no one was buckling up. And then they sent out police officers, and the first 50 people who got a really, like $1,000 equivalent fine, all of a sudden after that everyone was buckling up. So unless you know that there is a pre-described sanction and someone's going to actually act upon it, even the red lines mean nothing. So again, regulate, regulate, regulate. And in that sense, lobby, lobby, lobby every different institution that we identify as a battlefield.
Second, I think there's no good news here. I mean, 50 years from now, where are we? I don't even want to think about it. Regulation is one way to combat that. Activism, standing up, sharing, talking, going, present, talking about Israel, talking about who we are. Don't stop. That's another way, because we need the crowd around us. I don't know about teaching the Gaza kids or UNRWA and things like that. We are here. We are here to share and talk with our community, with our neighbors, with our people. We have to get their support. We have to make sure that they know who we are and why we are different. And maybe even talking so much about anti-Semitism is the branding of defend. We are branding ourselves in defending way. What is anti-Semitism? It's something that is defensive by the word of it. So until we change and the narrative, or maybe be more of a attacking or aggressive, as of now we have to share and talk with everyone we know. And therefore I see we do community-based organizations, so we need all of us to do whatever we can do. And Olga has here reports for us all to share, and please take it when you go. Olga, I know I took you, I know Galina pursue and forced us to bring you. You are amazing. You are amazing, and
it wasn't that difficult to pursue me.
Oh my God, it was wonderful, and thank you all for coming, and of course we all need Yes, and here we go. It's our annual report if you're interested.